So earlier, when the door opened to Air Force One, I was in my appropriate place at the foot of the steps, where I'd been for other presidents before, and I think appropriately so. He came to Texas, and the President of the United States. It was an appropriate and gracious thing for me to be there to welcome him, and also hand him a letter. Hand him a letter that outlines very clearly my concerns about border security and this evolving danger of these transnational gangs. And obviously I would have liked a more in-depth exchange of ideas, but I know for a fact that the letter got to him. It didn't get stuck, Dale, in that kind of slow-moving mechanism of government from time to time that can eat up a letter or a missive, and so I sincerely hope you'll take the time to read it because it was written in all good faith and a very good faith attempt to share with him what we know will work. It is a crisis on our southern border that cannot be overlooked any longer. Bottom line, an unsecured U.S.-Mexico border is a serious national security threat, menacing the safety and the security of our citizens, and the federal government is obligated to secure that border. Unfortunately, Washington has been an abject failure to date in that area, leaving our border vulnerable to exploitation and our citizens exposed to very grave danger. Washington's lackadaisical efforts have left the door open to a cadre of criminal organizations, including these transnational gangs, as I mentioned, who readily engage in very brazen violence in pursuit of their sordid interests. When these predators act without regard to the consequences, our citizens suffer, our communities are left shaken. Our citizens deserve the best possible effort to protect them from this advancing network of criminal gangs, including, I happen to think, well-trained officers on patrol. That's one of the best things that we can put on that border. The cutting-edge technology that will give those officers of the law or our military the edge that they need. And we just need a national resolve to stop these murderous cartels from extending their reach into the United States. Without border security, the concept of national security is impossible to achieve. Given the 2020 vision that's afforded by hindsight, we can see the casual factors of previous calamities. You share the remorse over warnings that have been ignored. You think about looking back to the 1930s in Europe, the South Pacific in late 1941, or even the United States in early September of 2001. There were early warning signs in all of those time frames that were ignored. Too many lives were needlessly lost. We ignore the current warning signs along our international border at our own peril. Just a few weeks ago, Nuevo Laredo was the site of a massive gunfight between drug cartels and Mexican soldiers, and that drove the citizens of that city behind locked doors for hours. The recent governor's election in Tamaulipas was marred by the assassination of one of the leading candidates. Put real fear into the hearts of all of the voters in that neighboring state across from Brownsville. In March, a U.S. consulate employee and his wife were shot to death in Juarez after leaving a child's birthday party. Last year, in that same city, 15-year-old El Paso girl was killed by stray gunfire. Just this year, there were 20 federal officers, Mexican federal officers, who have been murdered in Juarez with the links or events that are linked directly to the drug trafficking, including one who was viciously dismembered just this last week. According to press reports, more than 28,000 people have died in suspected drug violence in Mexico since 2006. Symptoms of that violence are beginning to creep into Texas. 2 Laredo teenagers are serving sentences for 7 murders committed in the United States on behalf of the Zetas. That is a particularly vicious cartel. The Zetas are actively recruiting young people to carry out their dirty work on both sides of the border. Youngsters no more than 13 years old are being hired and trained to kill. In other incidents, bullets from drug-related shootouts hit a building and a vehicle at UT Brownsville. A Walmart in McAllen was the scene of a suspected cartel kidnapping and murder. Grenades from Mexico are finding their way to connected street gangs in Texas, with just such weapons being used, and at least one failed attempt that we know of off-duty police officers at a club in Pharr, Texas. And I guess the most symbolic incident so far, just a few weeks ago, bullets fired from a gun battle in Juarez, crossed the river, struck the city hall in El Paso. Fortunately, by the grace of God, no one was injured. I offer these episodes as compelling evidence to those naysayers who scoff at the concept of spillover violence, saying such talk is just heated rhetoric. Bombings and beheadings, shootings and tortures, kidnappings are becoming a way of life for the Mexican drug cartels, and we can only expect that they will be increasingly applied to our soil against our citizens. With paramilitary gangs like the MS-13, the Mexican Mafia growing in power and boldness, it's only a matter of time before things get markedly worse and, Catherine, markedly more deadly. Washington simply cannot say that the border is secure when there are tons of drugs and countless illegal aliens and special interest aliens cross into our country undetected every day. The good news is this: hope is not lost. We still are in a position to do something about it. That's why, in the absence of assistance from Washington, D.C., Texas has stepped in over the last several years with the help of the Texas legislature. Texas has invested more than $230 million in border security efforts over the past 2 legislative sessions, filling gaps left by the insufficient federal action. That money has funded additional personnel. It's helped pay overtime for local law enforcement. It's helped purchase state-of-the-art technology, improve our communications and our rapid response. Throughout these efforts, we have expanded patrol capacity on the ground, in the air, and on the water. When the gangs and the other smugglers, they responded, and they changed their tactics. They're very adroit at changing their tactics, finding new routes and more remote areas. We have adapted, and we created the Texas Ranger Recon Team, for instance. These teams, which include members of the Texas Rangers, the Texas Military Forces, DPS, local law enforcement, they ensure that we have the ability to quickly put boots on the ground in hot spots, know matter where they may spring up. A lot of those boots are filled by our border sheriffs. They toil on the front lines of this conflict, and they're doing a stellar job in pretty tough situations. The overriding goal of our border security efforts is to support, not compete with, the U.S. Border Patrol and local law enforcement, and the results is a coordinated effort that we have been striking by presenting a viable and ongoing commitment to combat illegal activities along the border. We have successfully deterred and disrupted organized smuggling activities. We've cut crime in key areas, and we've worked to limit smuggling as well as into Mexico as out of Mexico. Everyone involved in this effort works long hours. They face very substantial and real dangers, but they need more help. That's why more than a year ago I requested 1,000 National Guard troops to help defend the Texas border. As I said in the letter I delivered to President Obama this morning, his recent decision to deploy 1,200 National Guard troops to the border is a welcome step, but it's clearly not enough. When Texas accounts for 64% of the entire border region between the U.S. and Mexico, and you're only sending 20% of the troops, you know, I was an animal science major, but that math doesn't add up. Okay? As a follow-up to today's brief meeting, I hope the President will accept my invitation to visit the border with me, to see for himself the nature of the challenge that we face and the impact of Washington's inadequate efforts. Hopefully, talking to people working all of those overtime hours, hearing what they endure for their fellow Texans, that'll help motivate Washington to do what it takes before it's too late. This issue transcends party, transcends politics. I don't care where you're from, what your party affiliation is. Everybody wants a secure border. We've heard far too many stories about families, fathers and sons and mothers and daughters, smuggled across the desert in brutally hot conditions on a journey that all too often proves fatal to them. We see entirely too many cases of young women and girls smuggled into the United States, held captive by criminals who exploit their innocence for selfish gain. We do not want to see communities in the United States spiral into the sort of chaos that we are seeing in the northern states of Mexico. However, without more help from Washington, episodes of spillover violence will continue to mount with increasingly deadly results. The drug cartels are playing for keeps, and it's far past time for Washington to do the same thing. So I'm going to continue to press this issue with anyone who will listen, because we have too much at stake. I don't want to see the fulfillment of Ronald Reagan's famous quote when he said, "A nation without borders is not a nation." We've come too far as a state and as a nation to permit a slide into lawlessness, so we've got to continue to do whatever is necessary to defend our citizens. God willing, Washington will join us in our effort.